Saturday morning. A peaceful, crisp autumn breeze flowed through the industrial park as I pulled up to my warehouse, ready for a quiet day of work. Owning a small logistics business had its challenges, but nothing compared to the nightmare I was about to walk into. I turned the corner and slammed on the brakes. Right in front of my warehouse entrance, three massive bulldozers sat parked in a neat, impenetrable row, completely blocking the driveway. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as my heart pounded. What the hell was this? I jumped out of my truck, my boots crunching against the gravel, and marched toward the machines. They weren't abandoned. Each had a smug-looking driver lounging inside, sunglasses on, arms crossed, as if daring me to challenge them. I didn't have to wonder long about who was behind this. A sharp voice called from behind me. "Good morning, Mr. Reeves. Lovely day, isn't it?" I turned to find Nancy Calloway, the HOA president of Westgate Business District, standing by the sidewalk with that ever-present smirk on her face. She was dressed in her usual I-run-this-town outfit, an overpriced blazer, pearl earrings, and heels that probably cost more than my monthly rent when I was starting out. She held a clipboard tight to her chest, an air of self-importance radiating from her every move. "Explain," I demanded, motioning toward the bulldozers. Nancy gave an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, it's quite simple. Your warehouse is in violation of zoning regulations, and, as such, we've taken temporary enforcement action. You cannot access this building until the matter is resolved." I scoffed. "Zoning violations? I've been running my business here for 15 years without a single issue." "Well," she said, flipping through her clipboard, "we recently updated our community improvement plan and found that your warehouse does not comply with the aesthetic standards of our district. That makes it subject to removal." My blood ran cold. Removal? Was she actually threatening to demolish my property? I inhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm. "Nancy, you don't have that kind of authority. This is an industrial zone, not some suburban HOA playground. I have all my permits in order." "Oh, I'm sure you do," she said sweetly. "But here's the thing, Mr. Reeves. This industrial park is part of the Westgate Business District, which falls under HOA governance, and we've determined that this warehouse is an eyesore. So, unless you can prove otherwise, we've made arrangements to begin." She flipped another page. "Demolition within 48 hours. My fists clenched. She wasn't bluffing. The HOA had done some questionable things before. Unnecessary fines, bogus citations, harassing small business owners. But this was a whole new level of corruption, and she had no idea who she was messing with. I exhaled, slowly rolling my shoulders back. "All right, Nancy, you want to play this game? Let's play." Her smirk widened, mistaking my calm for surrender. "Wonderful. I'll expect you to begin compliance proceedings immediately. Otherwise, those bulldozers might just have to get to work." I turned on my heel and walked away, ignoring her parting words. As soon as I reached my truck, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. My real estate attorney was on speed dial. But first, I needed to call someone else. Because what Nancy didn't know was that I wasn't just leasing this warehouse. I owned the entire industrial park that I drove away from my warehouse, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Nancy had no clue what she had just done. Blocking my warehouse was one thing, but threatening demolition? That was a whole new level of arrogance. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think strategically. This wasn't just about getting my warehouse back. It was about teaching the HOA a lesson they would never forget. I parked in front of my lawyer's office, barely waiting for the engine to stop before stepping out. Paul Harrison, my real estate attorney, had been handling my properties for years. He knew every legal loophole, every fine print in property contracts. When I explained what happened, he leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. "They really messed up this time," he said, flipping through my ownership documents. "Your name is on every deed in that industrial park. If they think they can bulldoze your warehouse, they're going to have to bulldoze everything, including their own precious businesses." I leaned forward, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. The Westgate Business District HOA had been bullying small business owners for years, imposing ridiculous fees, enforcing absurd aesthetic standards, and now outright try to steal land. But this time, they had picked the wrong target. I wasn't just another tenant trying to stay afloat. I was the landlord of every single property in the park. Paul drafted a cease and desist order within an hour. By law, the HOA had zero authority to order a demolition on private property without a court order, and even if they tried, it would take months of legal battles. The bulldozers blocking my warehouse? That was a legal obstruction and counted as trespassing. I had every right to call the police and have them removed immediately. But I had a better idea. Instead of shutting this down quietly, I was going to expose them in a way that would make sure they never tried this again. I drove back to the industrial park with a plan forming in my mind. As I pulled up, I saw Nancy still standing there, chatting with a few HOA board members. They were laughing, completely unaware of what was about to hit them. I stayed in my truck, pulling out my phone and dialing the local news station. This was the kind of corruption the public loved to hear about. An HOA trying to illegally demolish private property, abusing their power, and blocking an entire business from operating. The reporter on the other end sounded interested, especially when I mentioned evidence. I promised them a front row seat to the biggest HOA scandal of the year. Hanging up, I moved on to my next call. The tenants. Every single business owner in the park was about to get the truth. They had been paying their dues to the HOA, assuming they had no choice, but in reality, they had been funding an organization that had zero ownership over the land they were regulating. I sent out a mass email, attaching the property ownership documents and explaining how the HOA had been running a scam for years. Within minutes, my phone exploded with messages. Business owners were furious. Some had been fined thousands for violations that had no legal basis. Others had been forced to renovate their storefronts just to fit the HOA's impossible standards. And now, they found out they had been following rules written by people with no real authority. I stepped out of my truck just as the first wave of business owners arrived, their voices rising in anger. Nancy looked up, frowning as she saw the growing crowd. She tried to speak, but before she could, I walked past her and straight to the lead bulldozer operator. "Move these machines right now," I said, handing him a legal notice. "If they're still here in 10 minutes, I'm calling the cops and having them impounded." The operator glanced at the document, his face darkening. He wasn't part of this scheme, just a guy hired to do a job. Without a word, he started the engine, and within moments, the bulldozers were rolling away, one by one. The crowd erupted in cheers as the blockade disappeared, and Nancy's smug expression melted into pure rage. But I wasn't done yet. I turned to face the furious business owners and raised my voice. "This HOA has been illegally controlling your businesses for years," I announced, waving the ownership documents in the air. "They don't own this land. I do. And as of today, I am officially removing the HOA from power." The crowd exploded. Business owners cheered, some shaking my hand, others shouting insults at Nancy and her board members. Nancy's face turned bright red. "You can't do that," she screeched. "We have bylaws, regulations. This is a structured community." I cut her off with a printed notice, which I held up for everyone to see. "HOA bylaws only apply to properties owned by the HOA," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And this industrial park was never HOA property. Every fine you've issued, every violation you've enforced, every dollar you've collected, illegal." Nancy's hands trembled as she reached for a clipboard, frantically flipping through pages, looking for something, anything, to prove me wrong. But there was nothing. She had built her entire power trip on a lie. And now, that lie was crumbling. The business owners started chanting, "No more HOA, no more HOA." As more people arrived, some recording everything on their phones. The news van pulled up just in time to catch Nancy's meltdown as she shrieked about misinformation and legal disputes. But it was too late. The truth was out. I turned to the news reporter and handed over a copy of the ownership documents. "You might want to do a story on this," I said with a grin. "It turns out the HOA has been illegally running a business district they don't even own. And now, they're trying to bulldoze private property to cover it up." The reporter's eyes widened as they scanned the documents. "This is huge," they muttered. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved forward, and before Nancy could stop it, the news crew was broadcasting her downfall live. As I watched the chaos unfold, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The HOA had spent years controlling this park like it was their personal kingdom. But today, their kingdom just collapsed. The moment the news cameras started rolling, Nancy's face twisted in pure panic. She turned to her board members, frantically whispering something, but it was clear they had no idea what to do. The crowd was against them, the news was against them, and most importantly, the law was against them. As the news reporter fired questions at her, demanding explanations for the illegal HOA control, she stumbled over her words, trying to spin the situation in her favor. "This is all a misunderstanding," she stammered, her usual smug confidence now replaced with desperation. "The HOA has been working to improve this business district for years. We've only ever had the community's best interests at heart, but the business owners weren't buying it." A man from the crowd stepped forward, waving an envelope in the air. "You fined me $5,000 for repainting my storefront the wrong shade of blue," he shouted. "How is that in my best interest?" Another business owner, an elderly woman who ran a bakery, added, "You shut me down for a whole month because my flower pots weren't uniform. I nearly lost my business because of you." The voices grew louder, angrier, and Nancy's face paled. She took a shaky step back as the crowd closed in, their voices rising like a storm. I stood at the front, arms crossed, letting the moment sink in. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every single person in this industrial park who had been bullied by the HOA for years. The news crew captured every second of it. The anger, the frustration, the raw emotions of small business owners finally standing up against the dictatorship they had been forced to live under. Nancy's hands trembled as she turned back to me, her eyes filled with rage and fear. "This isn't over," she hissed under her breath. "You're making a huge mistake." I smirked, shaking my head. "No, Nancy. Your mistake was thinking you could control something you never owned." I turned away, making my way toward my warehouse now that the bulldozers were gone. It felt good to see my entrance clear again, but I knew this wasn't over. People like Nancy didn't just walk away quietly. The first real blow landed just a few hours later. As I was in my office, sorting through paperwork, my phone buzzed with a notification. An email from the Westgate Business District HOA. Subject line, "Notice of eviction. Immediate action required." I opened it and felt my blood pressure spike. The message was pure insanity. "Dear Mr. Reeves, due to your non-compliance with HOA regulations, your lease agreement within Westgate Business District has been terminated. You are required to vacate the premises within 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in legal action." I almost laughed. They were actually trying to evict me from my own property. I grabbed my phone and dialed Paul, my lawyer, who picked up on the second ring. "Paul, you are not going to believe this," I said, reading the email out loud. He let out a low whistle. "They're really grasping at straws now," he said. "They can't evict you from property you own. That's legally impossible." "Yeah, well, that's never stopped them before," I muttered. "What's our next move?" "We sue them," Paul said without hesitation. "We take this straight to court and shut them down for good. They've broken so many laws at this point, they won't stand a chance." I nodded, already feeling a plan forming in my mind. If Nancy wanted a war, she was about to get one. But the HOA wasn't finished. The next morning, as I pulled up to my warehouse, I noticed something was off. A bright red sticker was plastered across my entrance, big block letters spelling out, "Property condemned, unsafe for occupancy." I ripped the notice off the door, scanning the fine print. The so-called inspection had been carried out by a private contractor hired by the HOA, claiming my building was structurally unsound and needed to be shut down indefinitely for community safety. My hands shook with rage. They had no legal right to condemn my property. This was nothing more than a scare tactic, another desperate attempt to push me out. I wasn't going to let them win. I pulled out my phone and called the city inspector's office, demanding a real inspection by official authorities. By noon, a licensed city inspector arrived, clipboard in hand, looking annoyed. "We've been getting a lot of calls about HOA overreach lately," he said as he stepped inside. He did a full walkthrough, checking every structural component, every permit, every detail. When he finished, he shook his head. "There's nothing wrong with this building," he said. "This condemnation notice is a complete fraud." He pulled out his phone and took photos of the fake notice. "I'll be reporting this directly to the city. Whoever filed this is looking at some serious consequences." I watched as he peeled the fraudulent notice off my door, and for the first time since this started, I felt the tide turning in my favor. The HOA had just committed a crime, and now there was official proof. But I still wasn't done. I had one more move to make, one that would ensure they never pulled a stunt like this again. That evening, I met with Paul in his office. We drafted a lawsuit against the HOA for fraud, harassment, illegal obstruction, and property interference. We weren't just asking for damages. We were seeking a full dissolution of the HOA itself. If we won, Nancy and her board would be legally banned from ever running a homeowners association again. But I didn't stop there. I called the business owners, the ones who had suffered under Nancy's rule, and told them what we were doing. Within hours, we had over 30 businesses signing onto the lawsuit. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's fight. As I drove home that night, I knew the battle was far from over. The HOA would fight back, and Nancy wouldn't go down without a dirty trick or two. But for the first time in years, the people of this industrial park were fighting back. And this time, we weren't going to lose. The lawsuit was officially filed the next morning, and within hours, the news spread like wildfire. The HOA had been pulling shady moves for years, but now they were facing real consequences. Business owners were furious, and many of them started speaking out. The news station that had covered Nancy's meltdown returned for follow-ups, interviewing store owners who had been harassed and fined for ridiculous reasons. The baker who had nearly lost her shop because her flower pots weren't uniform broke down in tears on live TV, recounting how the HOA had drained her savings with unnecessary compliance fees. A mechanic explained how they had forced him to repaint his garage doors 3 times just because they didn't like the shade of gray he had chosen. One by one, business owners came forward, exposing the HOA's history of bullying and abuse. The more they spoke, the more the public turned against Nancy and her board. By the afternoon, city officials got involved. The fraudulent condemnation notice on my warehouse had set off alarms in the local government. The city inspector had already reported it, and now an official investigation was underway. A group of inspectors arrived at the HOA's headquarters, demanding access to their records. It turned out the HOA had been issuing citations and collecting fines without proper legal documentation. Every single fine they had imposed over the past 10 years was now under review. If even a fraction of them were found to be unlawful, the HOA would be forced to refund thousands, possibly millions, of dollars to the business owners they had exploited. Nancy, of course, wasn't handling any of this well. She had gone from smug and untouchable to completely unraveling in just 2 days. That afternoon, she stormed into the industrial park with a few of her board members, screaming about false accusations and ungrateful business owners. But the moment she stepped onto the property, she was met with cameras, reporters, and dozens of furious business owners waiting for her. One of them, a man who had been forced to pay a $10,000 fine just to expand his storefront by a few feet, stepped forward and shoved a refund request form into her hands. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Since you're still pretending you have authority, why don't you start by giving me my money back?" The crowd erupted in agreement, dozens of others stepping forward, waving their own refund demands. Nancy's face turned beet red. She stammered, looking around for a way to escape, but the cameras were rolling, and every business owner there had years of pent-up frustration ready to unleash. She tried to push past them, but another business owner, a retired veteran who ran a small surplus store, stopped her in her tracks. "You fined me for having an American flag outside my shop." Said it didn't fit the HOA aesthetic. He shook his head, disgusted. "You know how much I paid? $3,500. You called it a community beautification fee. You owe me that money, and you owe every single person here." Nancy was completely surrounded, trapped between a mob of angry business owners and the relentless gaze of the news cameras. Her board members had already abandoned her, slipping away quietly as soon as they realized this was a losing battle. She was on her own, and for the first time, she looked scared. But instead of admitting her mistakes, she did what she always did. She doubled down. "This is all a setup," she shouted, her voice shaking. "These are lies. This man," she jabbed a shaking finger in my direction, "has orchestrated this whole thing. He's trying to turn you all against me. None of this is legal. None of this will hold up in court." She was right about one thing. This wasn't just about a lawsuit anymore. This was an all-out reckoning. Right on cue, a city official stepped forward, holding up a court summons. "Nancy Calloway, you and the Westgate Business District HOA are hereby ordered to appear in court for fraudulent financial practices, illegal zoning enforcement, and obstruction of private property." The camera zoomed in on Nancy's face just as it completely crumbled. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the paper from the official's hands, but he pulled it back. "You are also under investigation for issuing fraudulent condemnation notices," he continued, "which is a criminal offense punishable by fines and potential jail time." The crowd went silent, and then they cheered. Nancy stumbled back, looking around wildly, but her board members were nowhere to be found. The last of them had slipped into their cars and vanished, leaving her to deal with the fallout alone. Her hands trembled as she grabbed at her phone, but it didn't matter who she called. There was no one left to save her. The city official handed her the summons, nodded politely, and walked away. And just like that, Nancy was finished. But I wasn't done yet. I turned to the business owners, raising my voice so everyone could hear. "The HOA is done, but we still have one more thing to settle. Every single fine they imposed was illegal. Every dollar they took from you was theft, and we're going to make sure you get it all back." The business owners roared in agreement. That night, we finalized a class action lawsuit, representing every single business that had been targeted by the HOA. The amount we were suing for? $2.3 million. Every dollar of unfair fines, every forced renovation, every fabricated violation. It was all being counted and filed. If we won, not only would the HOA be permanently dissolved, but Nancy and her board would be personally liable for the damages. The next morning, Nancy's house was raided by local law enforcement. Computers, financial records, and HOA documents were seized for investigation. The news stations broadcasted it live. The once mighty HOA president reduced to a shaking mess as officers carried out boxes of evidence. It was clear she had been running this HOA like a personal money-printing machine, and now she was paying the price. The final nail in the coffin came when the mayor himself held a press conference, condemning the HOA's actions and promising to ban HOAs from interfering with commercial properties in the future. It was an unprecedented decision, but after everything that had happened, the city had no choice. The Westgate Business District HOA was officially dissolved. As I stood outside my warehouse, watching the last of the HOA signs being ripped down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. After years of abuse, corruption, and manipulation, the businesses of this industrial park were finally free. But the best part? Nancy still had one more surprise waiting for her, and it was going to be legendary. The fall of the HOA spread far beyond our industrial park. News stations across the state picked up the story, labeling it one of the biggest HOA corruption scandals in years. Nancy's face was plastered everywhere, on newspapers, television, and social media. The footage of her receiving the court summons went viral, with people celebrating her downfall in the comments. The entire city had turned against her, and now, she wasn't just facing humiliation, she was facing real consequences. As the lawsuit progressed, investigators uncovered even more corruption. Nancy and her board had been pocketing fines, funneling money into offshore accounts, and using HOA funds for personal vacations, luxury cars, and private club memberships. When the evidence came to light, it was worse than anyone imagined. The class action lawsuit had initially aimed for $2.3 million in damages, but after forensic accountants went through the HOA's records, that number skyrocketed to over $5 million. Not only had they stolen from business owners, but they had also misused HOA fees from homeowners in the surrounding district. Every single person they had extorted now had a legal claim against them. Nancy tried to fight back. She hired expensive lawyers, appeared on local news, and tried to play the victim. She claimed she had been misled by bad advisors, that she had only been trying to improve the community, and that she had no idea where the money had gone. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, fraudulent citations, emails detailing the scheme. Everything pointed directly to her. The trial began 3 months later, and by then, she had lost everything. She had been removed from her position, her assets were frozen, and even her most loyal supporters had turned against her. She entered the courtroom pale and exhausted, dressed in a cheap suit instead of the designer outfits she used to flaunt. The judge didn't even let the case drag out. The evidence was so damning that within 2 weeks, she was found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. The court ordered her to pay full restitution, and when she claimed she couldn't afford it, the judge ruled that her personal assets would be seized and auctioned off to compensate the victims. That was when we got creative. A group of business owners, including myself, pooled our resources and bought everything at the auction. Her house, her car, her jewelry, her office furniture, everything she had used to exert power over us was now in our hands. The best part? We decided to give it all back to the people she had wronged. The baker who had nearly lost her shop got a fully funded renovation. The mechanic who had been fined for his garage doors got a brand new storefront. Every single person who had suffered under Nancy's rule got a piece of what she had stolen from them. The final blow came when her house, the mansion she had built with stolen HOA funds, was turned into a community center for local businesses. A massive sign was placed out front, the Westgate Business Community Center, funded by justice. Her name was removed from history, and in its place, we built something that would actually help people. As for me, life returned to normal. My warehouse was running better than ever, and with the HOA gone, businesses in the industrial park thrived. No more ridiculous fines, no more pointless regulations, and no more corrupt leadership draining us dry. The best part? The city officially banned HOAs from commercial districts, ensuring that nothing like this could ever happen again. One evening, months after everything had settled, I stood outside my warehouse, watching the sunset over the industrial park. A few business owners were gathered, laughing and sharing drinks, celebrating how far we had come. Someone handed me a beer, and as I took a sip, I realized something. We had won. Not just against Nancy, not just against the HOA, but against the very idea that a small group of power-hungry individuals could control something that was never theirs to begin with. And as for Nancy, she had disappeared. Last I heard, she had moved to another state, trying to start over. But she would never escape what she had done. Her name was ruined, her reputation was destroyed, and every single person who had ever suffered under her rule would always remember her as the woman who tried to take everything and lost it all instead. I smiled, tossing another log onto the fire pit we had built in front of the community center. It felt good to finally have peace. And as I looked around at the people who had fought alongside me, I knew one thing for sure. We would never let anyone like Nancy take control again.